I want you to just, for a second, think about the last time you did something you almost immediately regretted.
Oh, this is a fun game.
Right. Maybe you snapped at your partner over a dirty dish in the sink. Or you sent an email at work that was just a little too aggressive.
And in the moment, it feels completely justified.
Completely. It feels like you are making a rational decision. But then, 10 minutes later, the adrenaline fades and you're just sitting there thinking, who was that person? Why did I do that?
It's that distinct feeling of waking up at the wheel of a car you don't remember driving. You sort of look around and realize that for the last 5 miles, you weren't really steering at all.
That is exactly the sensation that we are chasing today. We are doing a deep dive into what is, I think, arguably the most unsettling book we've ever covered on the show, Robert Greene's The Laws of Human Nature.
Unsettling is a good word for it.
And I say unsettling because this book isn't really about how to deal with other people, which is, what we usually look for in these kinds of psychology books. This one forces you to look at the stranger living inside your own head.
That's a very fair warning.
Yeah.
Robert Greene, and most people are going to know him from the 48 Laws of Power, he actually calls this particular book his code book.
A code book.
Yeah. If power was all about external strategy, how to navigate the world out there, this book is about your internal wiring.
A code book implies that we are, encrypted, that we're puzzles that need to be solved, even to ourselves.
That is the absolute core premise. Greene argues that we like to imagine we're these rational, autonomous agents, right? We think we choose our careers, our partners, our arguments, all based on pure logic. But Greene's argument is that we are actually governed by these elemental forces, he calls them the laws of human nature, that just push and pull us around like gravity. And these aren't suggestions. They are hardwired into our biology, into our psychology.
Gravity is such a good metaphor because you can't negotiate with it. You can't just decide one day it doesn't apply to you because you're, a good person.
Exactly. And there's a key quote in the intro. He writes, "Ignore the laws at your own peril."
Wow.
If you don't understand the law of narcissism or the law of aggression or conformity, you become what he calls a passive slave.
Yeah.
You're just constantly reacting to emotions you don't understand. You're getting swept up in other people's dramas. And, you're repeating the same mistakes for decades on end.
Passive slave.
Right.
That is a heavy term. So the mission for this deep dive today is to flip that script. We want to move from being slaves to our impulses to being what Greene calls an expert decoder.
Right. Decoding yourself and decoding others.
But I want to be super clear. This isn't just dry academic psychology. Greene teaches through history. He uses these incredible and often really tragic historical figures as lab rats to show us these laws in action.
And he starts with a story that, frankly, it plays out like a horror movie for relationships. It's the story of one of those famous literary figures in history, Leo Tolstoy.
The author of War and Peace. When I think of Tolstoy, I picture this, wise, bearded sage, a moral giant.
So that's the image for sure. But in 1862, he's 32 years old, he's a count, and he's about to get married. The girl is Sonia Bears.
And she's much younger. Right?
Much younger. She is 18. She's come from a sheltered background. She's incredibly romantic, and she is just completely infatuated with him.
Okay, so you have a massive age gap, a massive experience gap. That alone is already a recipe for trouble.
It is. But the catalyst for the disaster wasn't the age, not directly. It was a very specific decision that Tolstoy made just days before the wedding. He decided that their marriage had to be built on a foundation of absolute honesty.
Which, to the modern ear, that sounds like pretty good advice. No secrets. You see that in every self-help book.
Exactly. We see that on Instagram graphics. Radical honesty.
Right. If you read that in a blog post today, you just nod along. But Tolstoy took absolute honesty to a completely weaponized level. He handed this 18-year-old girl his personal diaries.
His diaries.
And he didn't just suggest she read them, he insisted.
And we really need to pause here and think about what was actually in those diaries.
Yeah.
This wasn't just, I had a crush on a girl once when I was 20. These pages were graphic.
This wasn't a teenage diary.
Not at all. They detailed his really serious gambling addictions. They detailed his regular visits to brothels. They detailed him contracting gonorrhea.
Oh, my God.
And perhaps most devastatingly for a young bride-to-be, they detailed his intense, passionate affair with a peasant woman on his own estate, a woman who had borne him a child, a child who was still living there on the property.
Okay, just try to put yourself in Sonia's shoes for a second. You are days away from your wedding. You think you're marrying this noble, romantic, literary hero, and you open this book, and it's basically a confession of total depravity.
It's a psychological bomb.
So, why? Why on earth did he do that? Did he want to hurt her? Was he, like, trying to scare her off at the last minute?
And that's the really fascinating part. No, at least not consciously. In his mind, he was being virtuous. And this brings us right to the first law we have to talk about, the law of narcissism. Tolstoy was so completely wrapped up in his own need for moral purity.
His own need.
His own need to unburden his own guilt, that he completely failed to perceive Sonia as a separate human being with her own feelings, her own history, her own shock.
So he wasn't thinking at all about how this information would land on her. He was only thinking about how good it would feel for him to get it off his chest.
He used her. He used her as a vessel for his own confession. And when she reacted, when she wept, when she was horrified, he was genuinely confused. He felt that he was the victim.
He was the victim.
Yes. He thought, I am doing this incredibly noble thing, being so transparent, and she's punishing me for my honesty. He couldn't see past his own reflection in the act.
And that dynamic, him needing to be the moral saint and her being cast as the hysterical audience, that didn't just end with the wedding, did it?
No, that set the tone for 48 years of absolute misery.
48 years.
Greene calls this the narcissistic couple. And it's a really specific type of toxicity. It's not just that they fought, it's that they became addicted to the drama itself.
I want to dig into that because Greene mentions something he calls the third personality. It sounds a little bit supernatural, but he means it psychologically. What does that actually mean in the context of the Tolstoys?
It's the idea that when two people interact for a long time, especially in an intense way, the relationship itself creates a third entity. It's like a system, a feedback loop.
Okay.
So in the Tolstoys' case, Sonia, after this initial shock, she became the detecting wife. She became obsessed with his diaries. She would sneak into his study to read them, constantly looking for new evidence that he didn't love her, that he was still flawed.
So she's constantly poking the bear, looking for the wound. And what about Tolstoy? What was his role in this dance?
He became the persecuted saint. He would scream at her for invading his privacy, then he would run away into the woods, threaten to give away all his money. He'd start dressing in peasant clothes. He needed her to witness his suffering.
So they were locked in. She needed his flaws to feel secure in her victimhood, and he needed her judgment to feel secure in his martyrdom.
You got it. Sonia's jealousy fed Leo's ego, because if she's jealous, it must prove he's desired, right?
Yeah.
And Leo's coldness and moral posturing fed Sonia's need to play the martyr. They were feeding off each other's worst impulses.
The toxicity itself became an autonomous system. It just ran itself.
Greene describes it as mutual torture. At one point, Sonia wrote in her own diary, I am nothing but a worm to him. But she couldn't leave. And he couldn't leave either. Because deep down, Greene argues, they were both what he calls deep narcissists.
Deep narcissists. That's a harsh diagnosis.
It is.
We usually use that word for people who, take too many selfies or just talk about themselves constantly at parties. But Greene is talking about something much more structural in the brain, isn't he?
He is. He defines deep narcissism as a kind of break in self-development. Usually, he says, between the ages of 2 and 5, children learn to comfort themselves. We learn that we exist separately from our parents. The deep narcissist never quite learns that lesson.
So there's a fundamental emptiness.
A profound emptiness. They feel like they don't really exist unless someone is looking at them, reacting to them, validating them.
So all of Tolstoy's dramatic gestures, the renouncing of wealth, the absolute honesty, that was all just a desperate cry for validation.
It was a performance. Look at me, validate me, tell me I'm a good person, tell me I'm a suffering saint.
Yeah.
And when Sonia refused to follow that script, when she had her own messy human reaction, he punished her for it.
Okay, so that's 19th century Russia. But let's bring this to our listeners now. Most of us aren't counts, but we've probably all met a deep narcissist. Or maybe, we've dated one.
How do you spot this type of person before you're 48 years into a bad marriage?
Greene gives a really specific checklist, and the first item on it is so counterintuitive. He warns us to look for the master of disguise, a disguise.
We tend to think of narcissists as these arrogant braggarts. But Greene says the most dangerous ones, the deep ones, are often the moralizers.
The people who are louder than everyone else about how humble they are.
Exactly, or how much of a victim they are. Watch for people who frame everything in terms of their own victimhood or their own virtue. If someone is always telling you, I'm just too honest, people can't handle my truth, or I always give too much in relationships and get nothing back, be very, very careful.
Because they're framing themselves as the protagonist of a tragedy, and you're just a supporting character.
And you'll start to notice it in small ways. Your actual feelings, your bad day at work, your headache, they don't really register with them unless it somehow affects their mood. There's a profound lack of empathy that feels cold, almost robotic, once that initial charm wears off.
So what's Greene's advice for dealing with them? Is it just run?
Ideally, yes, run. But if you can't run, if it's a boss or a parent or a family member, the advice is to disengage. Do not try to change them. Do not try to explain to them why they hurt your feelings.
Why not?
Because they are literally incapable of processing that information in a way that doesn't make them the victim in the end.
Yeah.
You have to treat them like a natural phenomenon. You don't get mad at a thunderstorm. You just put on a raincoat and find shelter.
That emotional distance seems to be the key then. You have to stop feeding that third personality we were talking about.
You starve the drama. You become boring to them. And eventually they will move on to find a new source of supply, a new audience for their play.
So that is the law of narcissism. Transform self-love into empathy, or risk becoming a Tolstoy. Now, I want to pivot. Narcissism is all about the self. The next law is about conflict. It's about what happens when two people want the same thing. This is the law of aggression.
Right. And Greene titles this chapter, See the Hostility Behind the Friendly Facade.
And to really understand this, we have to go to Cleveland, Ohio in the year 1857. We're going to look at the origin story of perhaps the most ruthless and successful businessman in American history, John D. Rockefeller. But he starts out as the complete underdog.
He really does. At this point in the story, Rockefeller is barely 20 years old. He's a terrifyingly quiet, devoutly church-going assistant bookkeeper, and he enters into a partnership with a man named Maurice B. Clark.
Describe Clark for us, because he feels like the perfect archetype of the alpha male that business culture so often idolizes.
That's a great way to put it. Clark is 28. He's British. He's loud. He's a backslapper. He's incredibly confident. He sees himself as a born hustler. And when he partners with his kid, Rockefeller, he views it as just a convenient arrangement. He thinks, okay, I'll be the face, the deal maker, and this quiet little bookkeeper can handle the ledger.
He completely underestimated him.
He didn't just underestimate him. He treated him like a piece of furniture. Clark would bully Rockefeller in meetings. He would make these incredibly risky business decisions, expand way too fast, take on all this debt that made Rockefeller physically ill with anxiety.
And Rockefeller couldn't push back.
Well, whenever he tried to object, Clark would just shout him down. He'd say things like, "You're just a clerk, John. Leave the real business to the men."
Wow. Now, most people, when treated like that, would do one of two things. They'd either fold and just become totally submissive, or they'd blow up and get into a huge screaming match. Rockefeller did neither of those things.
And this is where we see what Greene calls the sophisticated aggressor being born. Rockefeller realized something crucial. He realized that getting angry would give Clark information. It would show Clark that he was rattled, that he was getting to him. So Rockefeller went utterly still.
Still.
He swallowed his anger, he smiled, he nodded politely, he just became a blank slate.
But he wasn't doing nothing. He wasn't passive.
No, not at all. He was plotting. He started secretly analyzing the company books at night. He realized Clark was incredibly sloppy. He started quietly meeting with bankers, the same bankers Clark had ignored or been arrogant with, and he impressed them with his insane attention to detail. He was building a fortress right under Clark's nose.
And then came the auction. This is one of my favorite scenes in the whole book because it's just so cinematic. The partnership obviously becomes untenable. They agree they have to dissolve it, but they have to decide who keeps the business. So they hold an auction just between the two of them.
Picture the room. It's just them and their lawyers. Clark is swaggering in. He's so confident. He thinks he knows Rockefeller's finances down to the penny. He's thinking, I'll bid high, scare the kid off, and I'll walk away with the whole company for a bargain.
So the bidding starts low. $500, then $1,000. It goes back and forth, slowly climbing. And Clark is getting louder, more aggressive, more performative with each bid. Rockefeller is just stating numbers, calmly.
Then they hit $72,000. And remember, in 1865, that is an absolute fortune. Clark hesitates for the first time. He's thinking, this is insane. The business isn't even worth this much. But his pride gets the better of him, and he bids it.
And Rockefeller.
Without even blinking, Rockefeller says $72,500.
And that one extra $500 just, It broke him.
It broke his spirit. Clark threw up his hands. He shouted, "The business is yours." He was furious, but he also thought he had won. He thought he had driven the price up so high that Rockefeller was now overpaying and would go bankrupt. He walked away thinking he had gotten the last laugh.
He had no idea.
He had no idea that Rockefeller had already lined up secret investors who were willing to back him for far, far more. Rockefeller wasn't gambling. He was executing a perfectly laid calculation.
And that right there is the difference between what Greene calls primitive aggression and sophisticated aggression.
Exactly. Clark was primitive. His aggression was visible, it was loud, it was emotional, it was reactive. Rockefeller's aggression was invisible. It was disciplined, it was patient. He used silence as a weapon to make Clark overextend himself and show all his cards.
Greene talks about this idea of passive aggression versus controlled aggression. We're usually taught that aggression is bad. Be nice, turn the other cheek. But Greene says denying your own aggression is actually really dangerous.
He argues that aggression is just energy. It's the drive to expand, to conquer a problem, to solve something. If you repress it, if you pretend to be nice all the time, that energy doesn't just go away. It leaks out sideways.
It becomes passive-aggressive.
Yes. You become resentful. You start making sarcastic comments. You sabotage people behind their backs. You gossip. You become weak.
So Clark was overtly aggressive, but he lacked control.
Exactly. The lesson from Rockefeller is to channel that energy productively. Greene says, attack problems with relentless energy. Don't attack people. Attack the obstacle. If you need to win a negotiation, don't yell at the other person. Prepare. Outthink them. Outlast them. That is healthy, controlled aggression.
And if we find ourselves dealing with a Rockefeller, if we're in a room with someone who is being quiet, smiling, but is clearly maneuvering against us, what's the defense?
Do not get emotional. That is the trap. The sophisticated aggressor wants you to get angry or scared because when you're emotional, you're predictable. You're easy to manipulate.
So you have to become a superior observer.
That's Greene's term. You have to detach. Watch their moves like you're watching a chess match. Ask yourself, why are they making that move? What is their long-term end game here? You have to meet their calculation with your own.
It's interesting. Silence seems to be this recurring theme. Tolstoy couldn't be silent. He had to confess everything. Rockefeller mastered silence and won an empire.
That's a great connection. Control over the impulse to react seems to be the superpower in both of these laws.
Okay, so let's expand the scope a bit. We've talked about the individual ego and narcissism, and they one-on-one battle and aggression. Now let's talk about what happens when you get a whole bunch of humans together in one place. The law of conformity.
This is chapter 14. Resist the downward pull of the group.
And I have to say, this section gave me chills. It's about the loss of the individual self, and it is terrifying. The story Greene chooses is from the Cultural Revolution in China. He follows a young man named Gao Yuan.
Gao Yuan's story is so heartbreaking because it starts so innocently. He was born in the 1950s. He was a quiet kid, very studious. He loved literature. He wasn't a radical. He wasn't political. He was just the kind of kid who wanted to get good grades and make his parents proud.
But then, in 1966, Mao Zedong launches the Cultural Revolution. And the goal was, essentially, to wipe the slate clean of human nature, to destroy all the old ways, capitalism, tradition, art, and especially individualism.
And this ideological ways hits Gao Yuan's school, the Yizhen Middle School. And almost overnight, everything changes. Classes just stop. The students organize themselves into these paramilitary groups called the Red Guards. And the atmosphere in the school it changes. It becomes electric and dangerous.
It's like a fever takes over the whole student body. And Greene describes how this quiet, bookish boy, Gao Yuan, gets completely swept up in it. The group energy is intoxicating. They start by criticizing their teachers in public sessions. Then they start burning books from the library. And Gao Yuan, who loved books, finds himself throwing them into the fire.
This is what Greene calls the social personality taking over. He argues that when we enter a group, our brain chemistry actually changes. We become more emotional, we become more prone to panic, and we become less capable of individual critical reasoning. We crave the safety and the anonymity of the herd.
The downward pull.
Yes. The group almost always gravitates toward the lowest common denominator of thought and emotion. It becomes about simple slogans, about us versus them. In Gao Yuan's case, it escalated horribly to violence. Students started beating their teachers. Factions of Red Guards started fighting each other in the streets. He became someone he didn't even recognize.
There's a specific mechanism that Greene mentions, the primal fear of standing out. Even if, deep down, you disagree with the group, The fear of being ostracized, of being labeled an enemy, is so powerful that you will go along with things you know are profoundly wrong.
It's an ancient survival instinct. For our ancestors, being kicked out of the tribe meant certain death. So we're hardwired to conform. It's a default setting.
But Greene doesn't just say avoid groups. I mean, we can't. We have to live in society. So he talks about how to lead in these situations, how to resist that pull. And he brings up this really interesting concept of the visionary authority.
This is the counter strategy. If the group is, by its nature, prone to panic and short-term emotional thinking, the leader must be the absolute opposite.
He calls it the third eye.
Right. The third eye is the ability to emotionally detach from the immediate chaos of the crowd and see the bigger picture. While everyone else is freaking out about the rumor of the day, the visionary authority is looking at the long-term trends. They're looking at the future.
That reminds me of that quote from the book about how true authority can seem almost godlike.
Seeming to possess the godlike ability to read the future. But Greene is clear, it's not magic. It's not about predicting lottery numbers. It's just about emotional control and a wider perspective. When the group pulls down into the mud, you must pull up. You have to elevate your perspective.
So if you're a manager in a company or a parent in a family or just a person in any kind of chaotic situation, your real power comes from your calmness.
Calmness and perspective. If you panic with the group, you aren't leading. You're just another panicked sheep in the flock. To lead, you have to stand apart, even when it feels lonely and frightening. That, according to Greene, is where true authority comes from.
So we have the downward pull of the group versus the upward lift of individual perspective. I want to shift gears now to something that feels very internal, almost intimate. This is Chapter 12, The Law of Gender Rigidity.
The subtitle is Reconnect to the Masculine or Feminine Within You. This is a really fascinating chapter because Greene challenges these very rigid roles that society often forces us into.
And he starts with a real-life Wonder Woman from the 15th century, Katerina Sforza.
She's a remarkable figure. She was the illegitimate daughter of the Duke of Milan. But here's the key part of her story. She was raised in the court, and she was given a humanist education. So she learned Latin, she learned Greek, but she also studied military history and strategy.
So she wasn't just, learning embroidery. She was reading about her ancestors, the Sforzas, who were these famous mercenaries, these warriors. She was reading chivalric tales of knights and battles.
And she had this incredibly powerful fantasy life. She imagined herself as a warrior. She didn't let the box of her gender constrain her imagination. She didn't say, oh, I'm a girl, so I can't do that. She absorbed those so-called masculine qualities of courage, aggression, and strategic thinking right into her own personality.
And she didn't just imagine it, she lived it. When her husband was murdered by rivals, she didn't collapse into grief. She took over the castle. She rode a horse into battle while pregnant.
And there's that famous or infamous story where her enemies captured her children and threatened to kill them if she didn't surrender the fortress.
Right, and she stands on the castle walls, lifts her skirts, and shouts down at them that she had, and I quote, the means to make more.
Which is a very, very bold thing to say.
To say the least.
Right.
But Greene's point here isn't just women can be tough too. It's much deeper than that.
It is. Greene argues that we all possess both masculine and feminine qualities. It's a spectrum, a mix from our genetics and our upbringing. But society pressures us to pick a lane. Be a man implies you have to repress your sensitivity, your intuition. Be a lady implies you have to repress your aggression, your ambition.
And this repression is the rigidity he's talking about.
Exactly. We become these flattened caricatures of ourselves. And when we repress these essential parts of our personality, they don't just disappear. They either turn into what Carl Jung called the shadow, this dark, unacknowledged part of ourselves, or they get projected onto other people, especially in our romantic relationships.
And this brings us to the counterexample Greene uses, which is from literature Marcel Proust's character, Charles Swann.
Swann is the opposite of Katerina. He's a wealthy, sensitive aesthete living in Paris. He's looking for love. And he falls for a woman named Odette, who is not his type at all. She's a bit vulgar by his standards. She's tough. She's what he would call difficult.
But he becomes utterly obsessed with her. Why, if she's not his type?
Because he projects an ideal onto her. Greene calls this the mothering projection, though it can go both ways. Swann is fundamentally looking for a woman to soothe him, to comfort him, to complete the parts of him he feels are missing. He wants her to be the softness that he lacks in his own character.
But Odette isn't soft. She's independent and strong-willed and has her own life.
And that's the whole tragedy of their relationship. He completely ignores who she really is. He tries to force her into this role of the adoring mother-lover figure. And when she refuses to play that part, when she acts like her own person with her own desires, he feels betrayed. He becomes intensely jealous and possessive.
So the lesson here is about this danger of projection. If you don't develop your own inner qualities, if a man doesn't develop his own inner ability to comfort and soothe himself, he will constantly demand it from a woman and resent her when she fails.
And vice versa. If a woman doesn't develop her own assertiveness and ambition, she might project that strength onto a dangerous or powerful man, hoping he will carry that burden of strength for her. It's a recipe for disaster.
And Greene says the goal is to become the authentic gender.
Yes. Katerina Sforza didn't play a pre-written role. She created her own. She was a woman who was also a warrior. She was fluid. Greene wants us to be fluid. If you're a man, reconnect with your empathy and your intuition. If you're a woman, reconnect with your ambition and your aggression. Don't look for a partner to complete you. Complete yourself first.
Complete yourself first. That feels like the perfect antidote to the bad romance we saw with the Tolstoys, too. It all connects back.
It absolutely does. It's all about self-awareness versus outsourcing your own development.
Okay, we're heading into the final stretch of our deep dive, and we have to talk about the ultimate reality check. The final boss of human nature, the law of death denial.
Chapter 18. Meditate on our common mortality.
This is my favorite section of the book, which sounds strange, but it's so surprisingly hopeful. You'd think a chapter on death would be profoundly depressing, but Greene frames it as a way to wake up.
And the guide for this particular journey is the incredible Southern Gothic writer Flannery O'Connor.
Her story is it's incredible. She's 25 years old. She's at the very beginning of her literary career, and she gets diagnosed with lupus, the exact same disease that killed her father when he was young.
In the 1950s, this is essentially a death sentence. It wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. She describes the feeling of it as having a bullet in the side. You know it's there, and you know that at some point it's going to go off.
Most people would just crumble under that weight, at 25, but O'Connor does something completely different. She uses the bullet.
She wrote her first novel, Wise Blood, while she was in the hospital, literally being fueled by blood transfusions. The proximity of death gave her this fierce, unsentimental urgency. She didn't have time for polite, pretty fiction anymore. She wanted to get to the brutal truth of things.
There's a great little story in the book about her brief romance, or maybe almost romance, with a textbook salesman named Eric Lankjar.
Yes, she clearly felt a deep connection with him. But she knew her time was limited, and she knew her body was failing her. So she gave him a copy of Wise Blood with an inscription that read, "For Eric, who has wise blood too."
Which is such a very Flannery O'Connor way of flirting. It's intense.
It is. But when he left, and he did eventually marry someone else, she didn't just despair. She channeled that pain, that feeling of being flawed and left behind, into her work. She wrote the short story, Good Country People. It's about a cynical, intellectual young woman with a wooden leg who gets seduced by a traveling Bible salesman.
And the salesman steals her wooden leg.
He does. It's dark, it's grotesque, it's darkly funny. But it was directly inspired by her own feelings of vulnerability. The wooden leg was her illness. She took the worst, most painful thing in her life and transformed it into art.
Greene uses her story to explain this philosophical concept of the sublime. What exactly is that?
The sublime is that feeling of awe, and maybe a little bit of terror, that we get when we face something massive and overwhelmingly powerful, like the Grand Canyon or the starry night sky or our own mortality.
Okay.
Greene argues that our daily lives are filled with so much petty nonsense. He said this on Slack. She didn't text me back. I want a better car.
The banality of life, as he calls it.
Exactly. But when death enters the room, all of that just vanishes. It's revealed for the trivia it is. Greene references Daniel Defoe's A Journal of the Plague Year.
From 1665 London, during the Great Plague.
Right. And Defoe observes that as the plague tore through the city, people stopped fighting about religion and politics. Neighbors who had hated each other for years started helping each other. He wrote, "A near view of death would soon reconcile men."
It puts everything into perspective, and Greene has a great term for this. He calls it reverse grandiosity.
Yes. Grandiosity is the normal human tendency to think, I am the center of the universe. My problems are the most important problems. Reverse grandiosity is the profound realization that I am a tiny speck in an infinite cosmos, and my time here is just a blink of an eye.
And you're saying that's not depressing. That sounds kind of depressing.
It's liberating.
Yeah.
If you are just a speck, then that embarrassing mistake you made at work last week really doesn't matter. Your fear of rejection doesn't matter in the grand scheme. What matters is the incredible, statistically impossible fact that you are here, that you are conscious, that you are part of this tenuous experiment of life.
The statistical impossibility of your own existence.
Exactly. Flannery O'Connor's bullet in the side made the world more vivid for her. The trees were greener, the people were stranger and more interesting. Greene wants us to cultivate that same awareness without having to get a terminal diagnosis, to meditate on our mortality so that we stop wasting the precious little time we have on things that just don't matter.
Memento mori. Remember you will die, so live now.
It is the ultimate law because it's the only one that none of us can ever escape.
Wow. We have covered so much ground today. We've looked at the narcissism of the Tolstoys, the sophisticated aggression of Rockefeller, the conformity of the Red Guards, the gender rigidity of Charles Swann, and the death awareness of Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But remember the goal that Greene sets out at the beginning, to move from being an apprentice in human nature to becoming a master, to stop blindly reacting and start deeply understanding.
He says we can either be passive slaves or masters of the art. And I think the choice is pretty clear. But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. There's one more concept from the book we haven't touched on deeply, but it's been lurking underneath everything we've discussed today.
The shadow.
The shadow. Greene brings up Robert Louis Stevenson's story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
It's a perfect metaphor. Dr. Jekyll is the nice guy. He's respectable, he follows all the rules, he's polite to a fault. But he represses all his dark urges, his anger, his desires. And because he represses them, because he shoves them into the basement of his mind, they don't go away. They just coalesce into Mr. Hyde, a monster, who eventually comes out roaring.
And Greene says we live in a culture of niceness. We are constantly pressured to be politically correct, smiling, agreeable, non-confrontational. But that doesn't mean the darkness goes away.
It just goes underground. And there's that quote from the story, "My devil had long been caged, he came out roaring." That is the warning. The more you try to be a perfect angel, the bigger and angrier the demon in your basement grows.
So here is the question for you, listening to this right now. We all have a shadow. We all have parts of ourselves we are hiding, even from ourselves. Aggression, envy, selfishness, strange desires. What part of your shadow are you repressing right now?
And more importantly, when will it come out roaring?
Thanks for diving deep with us. Keep decoding.
See you next time.